welcome back to the Sean Trey Show. I have a special guest with me today. Now, would you like to introduce yourself and tell people who you are and what you do?
Hi, my name is Bao Tran. I'm the writer-director of the feature film, The Paper Tigers.
Awesome. And again, like I said before we started, I watched The Paper Tigers, and I absolutely love it. Now, how did you get into film? How did you get into filmmaking?
Interesting question. I basically grew up here in America in the States. I was the first in my family to be born here in the States as a Vietnamese American immigrant.
Cool.
And so I kind of grew up watching all different types of entertainment at home.
Nice.
We watched a lot of tapes and that we would rent from Asia to a lot of the Hong Kong movies and the
Nice.
TVB shows and all the kind of the Vietnamese entertainment as well.
Yeah.
And so I kind of grew up watching a lot of that at home and then going out in the public, if you will, in the theaters, watching Spielberg and James
Nice.
Cameron and watching Hollywood pictures. So it was kind of this diet of all this East and West.
Right.
So that was kind of like, just like having food, noodles at home and then hamburgers outside. So that's kind of the experience of an immigrant American. And so I was watching a lot of Bruce Lee growing up. Obviously, he was a huge figure. That was my question.
I was going to say, what were your action influences? That was where I was going. I was excited to hear that.
Yeah. So Bruce Lee was huge. Obviously, it was something that kind of crossed the border because he was also, on American TV. And so it was an interesting kind of intersection. So that was a huge figure. But I watched him as a fan, just kind of watching his physical ability and just his charisma.
Yeah.
More as a fan growing up as a kid, but then watching Jackie Chan somehow was kind of the flashbulb or the light bulb moment for me to kind of like want to figure out what was happening, because there's something about the way Jackie Chan had the filmmaking in addition to his performance and acrobatics was so interesting to me. So I wanted to kind of like uncover that and just kind of grab the family camcorder and start videotaping and imitating what Jackie was doing, and then just kind of editing at that time. These were just kind of VHS decks, so it's just kind of editing on VHS decks and figuring out almost reverse engineering how films were made. So that's kind of put me down that rabbit hole around that.
That's really awesome, man. I remember the first time I watched Rumble in the Bronx. I was like blown away, because you just, in the 90s martial arts in the States was just, it was bad. You know what I mean? We were getting, it's not bad, but I mean, it was like, I got to give credit to like Van Damme for, doing what he did. But, Seagal had a lot of the waving hand stuff, and I mean, the movies were fun. But, when Jackie Chan came in, the level, the production quality, is spot on, They would do those, I remember like in a lot of Seagal movies, there would be a lot of those cuts. You know what I mean? You can see this in movies like, now like the Taken series or something, get to throw someone and there's always this cut, that allows the stunt man to kind of flip in there. But with Jackie Chan stuff, it was just... there weren't those same cuts, because they were actually doing it. There was more wide shots. But it was interesting that you got into this through working with the camcorder. That's pretty awesome. And, working with the VHS editing. Now, what was what were some of your real inspiration films growing up, man? What were the ones that were really that really pulled you in?
Yeah, it's quite a lot of stuff going on because, like I said, when I started going down this rabbit hole with Jackie Chan, I started want to read his interviews and hear what he was influenced by.
That's awesome.
And he started talking about how he was influenced by Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, the silent movies, and also musicals. So Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire and all those things. So it just kind of opened up the door for me to kind of explore movies as a whole and just explore, the whole idea, not just, kung fu movies or, going down that, but I was, studying the influences that he had. And that also further, I guess deepened my love for movies, just seeing what movies can be, and especially as a visual medium. Like you said, there's silent comedies and musicals and kung fu movies all have that in common of just being extremely visual, extremely physical, extremely accessible in that sense. So it's just kind of like those are kind of the films that I really appreciated and then started falling in love with and grow on that. So, and then of course, falling in love with all the classics and the films as far as just like what was out there. Because again, this is kind of this awakening moment as a kid, becoming, growing, and you're starting to see what all the, more the movies that are that are just kind of like maybe released in theaters. There's more than that out there. So that was really kind of like getting out there. So the other influence was not necessarily film, but yeah, certainly film, but filmmaker was Robert Rodriguez. Is when at that time he had a book called Rebel Without Crew, which talked about the making of El Mariachi, which is like that was like mind blowing in terms of just him just going out and obviously if you read the book it's crazy. It's like him donating his body to science to raise money to make El Mariachi happen. So it's like the whole kind of like chutzpah behind the making of the movie. It's not just making the movie, but the whole idea of like you could do this independently and not have to go to a studio, and that's really empowering for a kid that was like miles and miles away from LA or Hollywood and not have any entertainment show business ties to just kind of like be able to go out and do it on their own. And so that was huge.
That's awesome, man. And you touched on one thing that I think was really interesting. Like, Bruce Lee was a dancer, and he was a champion level dancer. And we don't often think about that. One of the things is that with my wife is a huge into musicals and into dancing, and she tried to get me to do some dance classes. And I'm a black belt in judo, and I did martial arts for years and years. And I had a real hard time with dance at first until one of my teachers that she was like, all right, I'm going to get this other guy, and the guy was also studied martial arts, and he started kind of reframing kind of the steps in just helping me connect some of the choreography, and then watching some of those classic Singing in the Rain and type of things like that, and you just look at the choreography to those. Now we don't have as many, except for like La La Land and some of the newer musicals that have come out. There's not that same choreography in film, except for the martial arts movies, where you have these insane choreographies that are multiple steps that you're moving all around. So I never thought about that, but there definitely is a similarity between the choreography of a dance scene and the choreography of martial arts to a degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of things around that. Obviously, there's a lot of dancers who were able to transition to martial arts choreography or martial arts films really well, and the foremost being like Michelle Yeoh. She had started out, I think, ballet, and she had moved into action filmmaking and made that transition very well. So I think that those skill sets are really similar. It's also like with physical ability, good structure is good structure anywhere, however you kind of move your body, and it's not just footwork, how you hold your plumb line and all that stuff. I mean, that's all kind of the same principles about how you kind of move around within your frame and your body. And so that certainly is a huge element. The couple stuff that they do have to kind of like, transition is kind of look like you're trying to pummel someone versus trying to present, so there's always kind of, those are kind of those little things, but underneath the hood, there's so much similarities for sure. And honestly, sometimes a lot of action directors will say, give us a dancer versus an MMA person. There's something that's a little bit something more pliable and something that translates to a screen more from dancing.
That's really interesting. Now, how did the journey of the Paper Tigers begin? Because it's a great story, man, and I want to hear how you came up with this story and how you kind of crafted this project.
Yeah, so the Paper Tigers is a story about these three guys that are kind of rediscovering the roots or lost their way, if you will. So it's kind of a certain time in my life when I was like I said, I was making films early, but I was coming to a point where it's one thing to do it as a hobby or as a passion, but it's another thing to get into it as a business or your livelihood, so you have kind of all those ups and downs that are natural to everything. And so I was feeling kind of burnt out and a little cynical about certain things. So I just kind of wanted to rediscover the things that I was in love with, like martial arts and movies, and rediscover and reignite really those kind of passions and interests. So, and those are the things that I was going through emotionally. And so I wanted to kind of like put that on screen and figure out, a story for these guys to kind of go through. And so that's kind of like the root inspiration. The kind of the bigger picture was, I had been working in Vietnam for a while, working on some films out there. A lot of my friends who had been from the States have gone back to Vietnam to make films, and so a lot of them are very successful. So I went back to be able to help out and work with them. And so, but I had the story, still percolating, and this was a
Mm-hmm.
very much to me kind of a fish out of water, like caught between a rock and a hard place type of story, because it's the very uh, immigrant American story, because you're caught
Mm-hmm.
between this old kung fu culture, but also this modern, you can say this American, culture that they have to deal with, these guys that have to fight kung fu matches, but then pick up their kids from soccer, it's like has
I
that kind
love
of like,
that, man.
yeah, so it's like this, like caught between two worlds. So it felt like a very Vietnamese American movie, is what I was trying to say.
Mm,
So it was a project that I definitely wanted to do, but it felt like it made the most sense to do it in the States. And so that was
mhm.
what kind of like set me on the path about 10 years ago, just to kind of like write the film and get it going. So it was a long journey to kind of get to where we are today, but uh, hopefully it was all worth it. But that was again kind of like the reasons why we kind of like made those decisions to make it and set these guys here in the States. And there's a lot of comments like, well, how come it's not like they don't have accents and all this stuff? But that's how our culture was growing up
Right.
in America. It was like that was the multicultural experience.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's. I thought that as a martial artist who's now getting older and dealing with some long term injuries, I thought the
Yeah.
movie was really relatable. Just when I'm not going to give away the story, but when the protagonist dealt with some challenges that he didn't think he necessarily was going to deal with, I was like, man, feel you there. It,
For
it,
sure.
it's just it was something that is really relatable, which is what good cinema is all about, is when people can sit there and watch whatever's happening and go, yeah, I understand that. I really understand that. Now, did you write it? You wrote everything yourself, right?
Yeah, I wrote and directed it.
That's awesome. Now, what was you said it took 10 years. Was that a script development thing, or did you finish your script 10 years ago and this was just about figuring out the right ways to put it together?
Yeah, I think the bulk of that 10 years was trying to raise the money for an
Mm,
independent film. It's a kind of a whole, it's like a startup, right? You have to kind of like
yeah.
put all, raise your money, convince investors that you're doing something right and it's worth getting involved in. And so there was just kind of like going through all that. And so a lot of that experience was, like I said, trying to go and get the money, which we thought was going to be a little bit easier. It sounded like a fun story. Maybe people would kind of be compelled by that, but
Yeah.
life turned out a little bit differently. But we went to LA and Hollywood studios to kind of pitch the film. There was a lot of interest. There was actually many offers on the table, but they wanted to change the cast to be white, which is, if you see the story or kind of like
It doesn't work.
understand the setting, it doesn't work.
It
Yeah,
doesn't
if you
work,
see the
man.
movie, it just doesn't make sense. What we were setting out to try to do. Number one, the way the story is, but also it wasn't something true to our experience.
Yeah.
My kung fu club or martial arts group was very diverse, and I'm sure
Hmm.
everyone else can attest to their own experience in martial arts schools in America, or even anywhere in a multicultural situation. It's going to be very diverse, and so that was the thing that we felt like really that was our hard line. Not to We didn't want to change that at all. So we said thanks but no thanks, and we went to back to here in Seattle, and then raised the money privately. We did a Kickstarter to kind of get it going, and so everything was
Nice.
done outside of the Hollywood system, and this was a completely independent film. And so that was really what took most of the years to get through. Is again, we didn't have a big angel. Just use the startup
Yeah.
analogy. We didn't have an angel or any big whales. It was
Yeah.
just a lot of people just pitching in what they could to get us to that finish line. So that's
Which is
kind of.
actually really awesome, though. I mean, it sucks that it took 10 years, but it's really awesome that you guys were able to pull that off. It's inspiring, man.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, it kind of it works out because we ended up shooting in Seattle, and we leaned
Hmm.
on the community to come and support and help us. Free food and free locations and all those stuff. And
That's
so,
awesome.
when you have more investors and supporters, it kind of magnifies your circle
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah.
that kind of like that was really helpful as well.
That's really awesome. Now, how did you go about finding these actors? Because I'm not gonna lie. Like, one of the things that really made it work is you guys had a great cast. From across the board, exceptional actors. Were these people that you knew, or was there a large casting process that you went through? How did you go about finding these guys?
Yeah, a little bit half-half because at least with the action martial arts or action stunt
Hmm.
world, it's pretty small, or at least everyone knows with each other within a couple degrees of separation. And so a
Yeah.
lot of those parts that even some people that we had worked with before, the two Vietnamese guys in the pool that you'll see is the martial club. So we had worked with
Yeah.
uh, previously, so we kind of knew them and definitely had them in mind when things kind of rolled around. Um, but we also went through casting, which is our casting director, Yumi Takada, had kind of like put together all these different looks and all this kind of like basically collection of actors that we can consider. So that was really just through casting. And so it was just really casting the net wide because, again, when you see the picture, you kind of understand it's like we needed guys who were vulnerable but could do martial arts, and
Hmm.
that's a very narrow
Right.
narrow thing, if you will, because most people do martial arts are kind of like actors are super fit and all those things,
Yeah.
but we were looking for something that was a little more off kilter.
That's really awesome. Yeah, that was what I think. Honestly, it made it really special was because the guys were a little off kilter. You know what I mean? Like you had some serious characters that were there, and great chemistry between them too. I mean, that was something that I really was like, great chemistry between the actors.
Fantastic chemistry, because it's also like those things that you don't really know because you can cast individually the pieces, but you really don't
Right.
know how they're going to be together. And that's kind of the gamble slash adventure of movie making and putting cast together because you don't know. But
Yeah.
the first day when I had all the cast together to do rehearsals, that's when I knew we were starting to click and we had something. And that's really exciting to kind of watch unfold before you. And when we were doing rehearsals and they were just like playing off each other, they're just ping ponging off of each other's improv and all those things. And I just knew that, especially the Three Tigers, that you can start to see
Yeah.
that these guys were best friends and
Yeah.
really kind of be invested in that. And that doesn't happen.
It doesn't always happen, man.
That's a testament to the actors. It's not anything I could do. It's just the fact that we lucked out and they worked hard and they really believed in
Yeah.
the project.
That's awesome. Yeah, you could tell that there was. That was the other question. How long was pre-production on this versus shooting?
About 6 weeks. Yeah, I mean, literally, they met each other for the first time maybe 6 weeks prior, and we just threw them.
Really?
We threw them into this martial arts boot camp and this action. So they had a lot of homework because a lot of them don't have martial arts experience or not, or more specifically kung fu experience, and so we had to
Wow.
like really kind of put them the ringer. Our action director Ken Kickwell, also an actor in the film, kind of put them through the ringer with all this kung fu exercise and just ways of moving their body. For example, Matt Page, who plays Carter, it's a very good martial arts. He's done kempo and I believe some of the Japanese Okinawan karate, but
Hmm.
it's a little bit different from kung fu. It's like just a little, just the way you move your body is a little bit different, just like when you move from different dance styles. So
Yeah.
for even him, he was still, had to kind of go through the learning curve and figure out what that was. So yeah, it's literally like 6 weeks before we started rolling camera. It was when they all met. So again, it was just being thrown in the deep end.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, and how long was your shooting?
The shooting was probably about, let's see, about 6 weeks. Yeah, about
Uh,
6 weeks of shooting. We had actually shot the film in segments, with the younger
Interesting.
version
Oh, yeah, yeah,
of the
yeah,
younger
yeah.
version of Tigers, the earlier 80s, 90s. We actually shot that before. Again, with independent filmmaking, we had to shoot it in pieces because we had some of the money in place, but not all the
Right.
money. So we started shooting it kind of in piecemeal. So yeah, it was all kind of like scattered, but we was all put together somehow.
That's awesome. Now that was the thing that I was watching too. Like I've always thought about period pieces. Now, how was it shooting a period piece with an indie? Like, I mean, were costumes challenging? What was it like? Was it tough to put together all of the stuff that you needed to make it? Because it felt believably 90s, man. I was like really really impressed by that. Was that challenging for you?
Yeah, right on. It was, and the thing is, like, we shot that kind of a separate. We shot maybe that portion about a year and a half before we shot kind of the adult version or the older version, so we could
Okay.
kind of focus on just those scenes for that production, and so that kind of made it a little
Mm,
bit simpler. But yeah, but to your point, it is hard because you're trying to find number one locations that kind of look like it was the 90s and 80s, and you don't
yeah.
have to really change it too much, so that way you don't have a lot of resources, so you kind of hopefully you can find a lot of locations as is. and not have to do too many tweaks. And then also for our wardrobe team, I mean, for them, they just had to hit up, all the thrift stores and the secondhand stores to get the wardrobe and all those things. So that's kind of like the challenge too, of finding, period clothes and just finding the appropriate setting of all that. So I mean, it was all hands on deck in terms of like doing a period piece, because you have to kind of like always keep an eagle eye. Let's say if you're outside, always keep an eagle eye. If there's a more modern car parked, you have to kind of like move the camera over or just frame it or move the car, and all those little things that you have to look out for. And it was just it was interesting, just kind of like, wait a minute, that didn't exist at this and that year, and you have to kind of like fly it out.
That's really interesting. I guess I was one of my good friends, Susan Som was one of the lead costumers on Minari, and so and it's also period piece in the 80s, and she had to do a bunch of really cool designs, but it's just cool seeing people that dive into those, because we see a lot of like I feel like the 90s as well is kind of underrepresented, for except for Captain Marvel. You don't see too much 90s stuff done lately, and it's special, man. So
yeah,
it's pretty cool. No worries. Now, as you move toward production, were there any like, with doing a martial arts film, what are some of the challenges as a director that you have to kind of anticipate or work with? What are some of the things that you had to think about versus, kind of a non-action piece? What are some of the things that you as a director have to kind of prepare for?
For action specifically?
Yeah, for doing a martial arts movie,
Well, a lot of those things. Number one, also just the kind of training up your actors. For us, we can't afford stunt doubles, so you're basically, I said straight up, you're gonna have to do your own stunts, and so a lot of them, all of them really, were up to the challenge, but it was just kind of like, that's kind of like what what was set before us. There's no way of swapping anything out. There's no tricks that we can pull off. There's no camera, swap out. So, what you see is what you get. And so that was kind of the high wire in terms of like the action design and making sure that, they could do what we had set out to do, but also in a way that was still convincing and all those things. So the fine point of showing these guys that were out of shape, but still able to kind of throw a kick and a punch, but not. That was the really creatively challenging part, because it wasn't like, okay, here's the scene where the fight scene, and you go in and kick everybody's butt, and you're awesome, and you're like Rambo, right? And it wasn't like that. So you always kind of like check yourself to make sure that we were kind of in the right lane of what the story was. So there's that, just kind of the overarching kind of creativity element, and then kind of the down to brass tacks, just trying to get all the stuff that you need on time and on schedule. And because for the independent film, and you just don't have a lot of time, especially if you're in a certain place or a pool, or the actors aren't always available for the entire time, and you have to get everything done. And so the luxury of a bigger film or a studio film, sometimes they can extend the time, or they can come back and do what's called pickups, kind of do like those little, do-overs and all those things. But with indie film, they're gone. It's like, this is it. So case in point, when we were on the rooftop, it's the kind of the big finale of the film. It's a nighttime scene. And so I remember we shot in the summer, which is actually up here in Seattle. We have very short nights because we're in the northern hemisphere. So it's actually short nights. So once the sun comes up, you're done. You can't continue on. It's no overtime. It's like, the sun's telling you go home. All right. And so you're fighting the clock in that sense, and you're fighting the light, and you're fighting all those things, and trying to make sure you have to kind of get everything that you can in the can, so that you can survive to the next day. Because if you get behind one day, you get even more behind the next days, and suddenly you won't be able to finish what you get. So you have to kind of make your day and be able to kind of like be in a position for success for the rest of the day. So that was the hard part as far as that. And then actually it rained on the rooftop.
That's what I was gonna say. It's Seattle, man. That's what I was worried about.
Exactly. It was like one of the. I think they say it's like one of the biggest storms of the last the previous 20, 30 years. Just came in, and one of those nights that we were there is a huge, especially those kind of like hot and humid type of summer thunderstorms, which is like we usually never get those. We never really get those, and that was coming in. and we were on a rooftop. We got like big metal points and big light stands, and so we had to clear off for sure. And so we,
Yeah.
for everyone's safety, we were off the roof. I think for about a good 4 or 5 hours before we could actually get back to shooting again. So again, keep in mind how short a night that we're talking, and the sun is down maybe like 9:30, 10, and then the sun is back up maybe about 6. So it
Oh
really
man.
wasn't that much time that we had to kind of recover and get going. And so that was all the challenges again, just kind of making it this time. And then but also I had a great action team again, Ken Kidgua and his team, Sam Loke and Kerry Wong. They all had worked together in a lot of projects together before, so they were able to kind of like roll with the punches and get going. So I leaned on them big time to be able to deliver on the action. So I just had to kind of make sure on the big picture things were happening on time, and we were kind of on schedule, and thematically we were getting the things that we need for the story. But then you kind of trust your people at that point.
That's really awesome. Now, how did you go about building out your team?
Yeah, so a lot of the teams, we had worked together for many years and friends over the years. So there was a short film that we made called Bookie that a lot of the original, I guess, the crew from the Big Tigers came from. Our DP cinematographer Sean Mayor, our action team Ken Kidgua and Sam Welk as well, our producer Michael Velasquez, and so a lot of us that kind of like made that film. That was about a good 15 years ago. We kind of like made this, pinky swear and this pact. It's like, hey guys, when it comes to a point, we're gonna make a feature film. We're gonna do it together, right? And so
Awesome.
everyone, was true to their word, and cut to, 15 years later, we were able to kind of make the film, with all the people that we had from the previous and then some. And what was cool
That's
is that
awesome.
they all continue to work. No one just kind of like slacked off and just like I don't know, waited for this phone call that was, who knows when it was going to come, but everyone just worked, and
Yeah.
everyone developed their craft and grew and got better. So it's cool to kind of like have us come back together on the feature, really old, longtime friends, but our skill sets have gotten stronger and better. And we were just like ready to conquer the world, and we just were
That's awesome.
really hungry and, out to prove something. So that was super cool.
That is really cool. No. What type of gear were you guys? How big was your crew? First of all, I mean, what type of? I mean, because as an indie feature, it's like you didn't have hundreds of people. Were you guys? How many people were you running normally on a day?
Yeah, well, it can vary. Sometimes the bigger days, like on the rooftop, that was a huge setup
Yeah.
because that rooftop was actually very blank and bare, and so all the stuff
Yeah,
that you see on
stage.
it, you had to kind of lug up to the roof through the
Wow.
elevators and whatnot. So that took a lot of time to kind of dress the set and get all the rigs and
Mm,
everything going. And so, depends on the bigger days. So it can vary. It can flex maybe from about 30 to 50, up to 50 or plus or whatever. And so for an indie film, that's pretty,
that's
that's
pretty
a healthy
big.
size. But yet
Yeah,
still,
that's pretty
you
big.
can always use more people because again,
Right.
it's all about, the hands on deck to be able to get the work done. Many hands make light work. So that's kind of the
Right.
challenge with indie film is like, where's that balance between, trying to get even warm bodies even to be able to work on the
Hmm.
film. That's hard too, because in Seattle it's a bit of a smaller market, and so
Hmm.
you aren't quite able to kind of crew up in the way that you are, say, in LA or New York.
Hmm. That's really interesting. No, what did you guys shoot on, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, we shot the main camera that we shot on was the RE Mini.
Okay.
It's the smaller form factor from digital camera from RE. And the beginning portion of the film, we actually did shoot on a high camcorder to kind of
Really?
capture that
That's
look.
awesome.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, we had the kind of video tap to record because the tape isn't as reliable. All that, it's very
Yeah.
brittle. So you actually kind of
Hmm.
had to tap that video signal. But we did shoot on a high camcorder to kind of get that analog look.
That's pretty cool, man. That's really cool. Now, as you went into this, well, first of all, uh, I've been following you on Instagram and such, and I've been seeing some of the posts. You're like, hey, Marvel, take what are some of your long term vision, man, goals for your career? What would you like to do? Let's imagine that I've got Aladdin's lamp pops out. What would you like to do next?
Well, I want to continue telling stories, especially stories that kind of really interest me and motivate me. Because for when you're making a film, it's not just the 100 minutes that you see on screen. It's actually years of
Right.
work. So for me, it's I'm not getting any younger, and so I do want projects that really can inspire me and want me to be engaged for the 4 or 5 years or whatever it takes to kind of get it made. And so
Yeah.
that's really important for me, and also just something that we can, how do you say, bring something to the world in a way that's like either
Mm.
something that's can increase a little bit more empathy or creates a little bit more understanding about each other and as a culture
Right.
and as a people. I think that's really important. And I think that's really the best thing about us, cinema or movies, is that we have all these strangers in the dark, and suddenly,
Right.
you're on the same ride together for about 2 hours. And I think that's something really powerful. And so I think, just not to get too artsy fartsy, but I think it's really important what we do as storytellers is that we're telling these campfire stories, but the campfires as big as the world, and that's from Brad
Mhm.
Bird, and just kind of who made The Incredibles and Iron Giant. So that his words
Mhm.
kind of always stuck with me in that sense. Like that's what we're trying to do, and so I just want work that's some people can really enjoy, hopefully laugh, cry, and have all the emotions and be on their merry way. And so whether it's kind of an original story or who knows, a studio film, or I think that's at the end of the day that's what is the most important, because when you lose that, I think you kind of miss the boat on everything else.
This has been something I've been over the past, a bunch of the recent interviews that I did. I've talked with people about their projects, and your words ring true. Like what a lot of people said is like, first of all, it's like having some type of story that has a message to it. It's not just about making something. If you're putting that many years of your life and that much energy into it, you want it to be something that you can, is a message that is important to you. What do you feel like is the core message of the Paper Tigers?
There's a few things. I think at the end of the day, it's just trying to rediscover the things that you might have heard or had in your
Mm.
upbringing, and whether you've kind of like strayed away from that, whether you're kind of
Hmm.
like, it's kind of like gut check. At the end of the day, the film is hopefully a gut check for all of us to kind of think about the things that we might have had value in and maybe forgot about, and maybe kind of rediscovering those things, and whether it's kind of worth passing on to the next generation. And that's kind of the arc that these characters go through, especially with their martial arts heritage and their history that they were given, and they kind of
Hmm.
went to pot, and they uh, I guess set it aside and forgot about it, but now they're kind of rediscovering how important it is. And so I think that's kind of the thing that we want to set out. And honestly, these things come out different once it's out into the world. The audience kind of takes it in its own way and be able to kind of like becomes their own in a way. So it's not really
Yeah.
my
Right.
movie or our movie anyway anymore. It's the world's movie. And I think just some of the feedback that we've been getting online, and just kind of just through all these messages, has been really heartening. And I think one of my favorite uh, reactions was like, I saw this movie and I picked up a phone and I called a friend I haven't talked to in years. And it's just like
That's
something,
awesome.
yeah, it's just something as simple as that. And I think that's just enough that it's like, well, we've done our job in that sense. So yeah, in the sense of like being able to just give and warm your cockles to be able to like want to do something in your life. And I think that's incredibly powerful. So
Mhm.
anything that people are motivated to, and people go back to training. I saw a couple of people that posting clips like, I'm going back to working out, I'm going back to martial arts, I'm
Wow.
going back. So all those things are super cool as well.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I was trying to make a list of all the different sub themes you had, and there's a lot going on in this script, man. There's a lot that you have going on. I mean, you of course you have the story about these guys who kind of drop the ball on the you have the story about these friends that are just absolutely this friendship that is broken apart for some reason, but you also have this subtext of like multiple culture clashes. You know what I mean? And people like caught in limbo. And this is something that a lot of my Vietnamese American friends have talked about. You brought that up, that one of my good friends is a musician in the U.S. and he wrote this song that was based on that idea that like for people when they are in the U.S., well, do you fit in this group or do you don't fit here? You don't. There's just this caught in a limbo, and I have it to a different degree. My dad's British and my mom's American. And though I know both countries speak English, they're really different. And when I would spend time in England, and even something like this it sounds weird. American clothes don't fit me. Like literally when I went to England for the first time, I was like, wow, I can shop here. Stuff just fits me different, and it was weird like that. But I mean, the idea of being caught in the middle, like, how did that play into the movie and in your writing process?
I think a lot. I mean, that's a huge part. Like I said, that was one of the primary reasons, obviously, for shooting it and setting it in the States. When, like I said, when I was in Vietnam for a bit, I had mentioned this project to a few of my peers and producers, and everyone's like, they were like, why don't you make it here in Vietnam? It's an easier way to kind of get it funded. We can get it going faster. Otherwise, you're going to go to America, and what are you going to do? Try to raise money independently? And everyone kind of chuckled, and I'm like, oh. So and then it's exactly that. But it was something like, if you set the story in kind of a let's say a monoculture like Vietnam, it doesn't make sense. It is about getting caught.
It would be really different.
Yeah, so
really different.
In the same sense that, it couldn't be an all-white cast, it couldn't be an all-Asian cast. Like, it just doesn't work that way. Yeah. And it's exactly kind of that experience of being in between. It's exactly kind of the experience of growing up and being reflective of my experience. Yeah, it's exactly that. It's just like, sometimes, I'm considered too American for my Vietnamese friends, and maybe a little too Vietnamese for my American friends. So, it's a very common experience that we, all of us really kind of have, being caught between those two things and places. And exactly, that's kind of like what this journey that these characters go through, not just this culture, but also generationally. Whether these kind of old, kung fu like can be really like what's called, it's a very fortune cookie. Sometimes it's very like, it's really like all these like sayings and aphorisms that Carter says, is all that stuff is like really
all map pages.
Yeah.
Like comments half the time are so funny. Man.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all those things like that he's still doing, but Carter's still keeping the torch. So it's like that's kind of the things that we want to play with. Yeah, it's like, okay, these guys can kind of dismiss Carter, but he's the one doing it while they're not. And so that's the thing that, I really want to like put between. It's like the whole guilt trip and just that experience of just kind of like, oh man, this guy's like he's shaming us right here. So, so there's all those kind of elements of again, Asian, I guess you could say Eastern and Western kind of values generationally. But even in the Asian, or even in the, what you call kind of people color culture too, the whole appropriations and all those things that you have with the younger punks, and what they're kind of like, what they seem to be free with the words, and let loose with their what they're feeling. So there's all those things too.
Yeah, it was really one of the things that I felt like is it was a large cast. And so you had quite a few people, so that you were able to I think that would have been a challenge in my mind if you had fewer actors, because you were able to, with so many actors, really you have the younger martial arts students, you have Matt Page, who's kind of that white guy who's really into it. You have an African American student, you have the Asian Americans. It was really fleshed out. And so you can look at these, because one of the things you pointed out that you said earlier is, when you want to write films, you want to create empathy. And I think that's so powerful, because the good cinema allows us to feel for the characters. And that was one of the things I was able to, I think that for me, I felt, because I was like, well, I can identify with this. I can identify with this. You're able to identify with all of these different struggles that each of the characters was having. And I just thought that was really good writing. I'm not trying to fanboy on you right now.
Oh, go on. Don't say, What's interesting is something that we always want to set out to do was also kind of create something that's a bit of a broader reach in terms of what we're trying to do. And the other, the things that we've been really encouraged by is, again, the feedback. And some folks were saying oh, I don't really like kung fu movies, or I don't usually watch kung fu movies, but I really love this one, or something. The people really, really take a shine to it. And especially, I think this is actually a funny recurring thing. It's usually the guys into the kung fu movie, so they're watching and they'll say, yeah, my wife or my partner, doesn't like kung fu movies, but she was sitting next to me and she just started watching with me too, and it was just and everybody's awesome. And she really enjoyed it. So there's some type of just something that's really, really interesting happening that's kind of like pulling people in, which is great, which you wouldn't normally expect, and that's what we always hope for. It was just something we really wanted to create, that kind of like big campfire story that everyone was welcome to come and watch.
One of the things too that I think that it was a wise choice that you made was there's a huge comic aspect to this, and I really think that the comedy, comedy is so disarming, like, because you can get through heavier topics, because like, let's be real, like some of the themes were, when you start exploring multicultures and race and stuff, that can get heavy, but there was such a good, and it wasn't overly done comedy, but you had these great zingers that were just kind of cutting through, that kind of lightened it up. How was it? How do you approach comedy as a director? Is that something that you really have to kind of ramp people up to kind of to nail those lines, or is it something that comes through more on the actors just nailing it themselves? How do you feel with that? How'd you go about that?
Yeah, I think it's teamwork at that point, because I think just setting the script out and just kind of make sure all the things that are there, or at least the bones are there. And again, maybe it's the way I see the world, and it's part tragic and part comic all the time. So there's always something really funny, in serious moments to me. So I you kind of set that buffet with a script. Yeah. And when the actors come in, they take it to that next level. So a lot of them, like I said, when we were in rehearsal and they started improvising and ad-libbing, you could just see the sparks fly, especially among the three tigers and Carter. You kind of see that whole vibe and the energy that they had. And, at the end of the day, like, for example, Carter is not really their enemy. He's almost like their fourth brother that they never want to include. Right. He's just like, they never really want to include him, but he's around. He's always always just kind of bugging them. And so that was the vibe that eventually kind of came out, and they were always just kind of like, that's kind of like what you kind of see throughout the film. And all the one-liners and the ad-libs that they came in, I think it's because they saw where they could run or where they could play and be able to kind of like have fun with that. And so again, it's just kind of like setting the table, but also letting the actors and all the creatives, action team, also they had fun with the fight scenes and try to figure out all the humorous bits that could happen out of that, and just like let them all like bring something to the table. And so I think that's just kind of like the teamwork element. But it does start with kind of like giving permission. So again, like I said, the way I see the world is a little bit off kilter, or, a little bit silly. So I just kind of want to let them have at it.
That's awesome, man. Now, was there a ton of improv going on, or was it, mostly on script, or were they like kind of running with it on their own?
A lot. Yeah, I mean, so what we'll typically do is we kind of shoot the scene as scripted. And so we have that, and then I'll give them a few other takes that they can try and like start riffing or have ad-libbing. I think the first the first scene that we started shooting where they really kind of started going to town was the funeral scene. And that happened about midway. That was probably the Carter or Matt Page's first shoot day, so he was super nervous. He told us the story where he's like super nervous, and he's like coming on to we're in the funeral, and then Ron, who plays Ahing, just starts like giving all these zingers at Carter, and like Matt's like just so like flustered and just really like, oh, like this is crazy. And then so what happens when you shoot film, we only had one camera, so we're shooting in a certain direction at a time, and so our camera was on Ron, and Matt was off screen, so Ron was like just spitting, fire. And then so we broke for lunch to turn the camera around, so now it's like Matt's close up and it's his turn to kind of deliver the lines. And so Matt went off during lunch on his own, just started like, you cannot let him beat you, and they just got super competitive about it. And then Matt again credit to him, like he just sat and stewed in his emotions the entire lunch and just tried to figure out more like these zingers and one-liners. And so there came time when after lunch we were had the camera on Matt, and he was starting to spit fire, and then Ron was spitting back, and it was just like, it became like really fun to kind of like see them all just again go at it. And again, we have a lot of these deleted scenes. I think it's on the special features of all the film. But so you can see all the kind of like the things that were left on the floor. But definitely the actors came in and brought their own elements, because again, those are the things that only they know about their characters and their relationships. at a certain point, you kind of have to let them fly because they know it
Yeah,
better than the writer, myself at that point. So you just have to trust that process.
that's really awesome. And it is the well, you're what martial arts background do you have? I haven't asked that yet. I would love to hear about that.
I did Taekwondo. I was like this couch potato, and like every good Asian kid, I did Taekwondo. I did that for a few years, and I also did. Well, Bruce Lee spent some time when he first came to America. He came to Seattle, so I studied a lot of the
Yeah.
Bruce Lee lineage of Kung Fu, which was like kind of this Wing Chun version. And so now just kind of like
Nice.
doing all these different types now. Now I'm doing like old person stuff. I'm doing Tai Chi and just like trying to do something where my body can heal and not have to hit something.
Yeah,
So it's a little bit more peaceful at
I
this
feel you,
point.
man. I started. I had been out of training for a while,
Mm.
and then with my daughter, she just turned 5. But we before COVID hit, we were starting up some Taekwondo classes together.
Oh, great.
And I was
Yeah.
trying. It was fun though, man. It was great to do it with her, and then I've been trying to keep training her during the lockdown. But it's interesting that yeah, I'm definitely gravitating towards the old man stuff. I love the Tai Chi. Love me some Tai Chi and some
Yeah.
Qigong.
Yeah.
That helps, man. But one of the things that you pointed out is like there is that with martial arts there's that degree of you kind of have to let go at a certain point. You know what I mean? You do your best, you train, you prep, you put all the work in, but then when you get in there, you kind of have to kind of let go. And so it's kind of like that Zen in the art of filmmaking, I suppose. Kind of got to surrender at some point, which is tricky though.
It's very tricky, and it's like yeah, like you say, the art of letting go is it's also kind of knowing when to be firm enough and just kind of steer the things
Mm.
where you need to go, but also kind of be open to the chaos. So it's one of those things. It's the best analogy that I heard is it's like surfing. It's almost like
Yeah.
the ocean. You got to respect the ocean and be in it, but you also kind of like got to stay on your board, right? And so you have to kind of like
Hmm.
find that literal balance of what it means to kind of like be in this storm but it's still kind of be able to ride through. And so that's kind of like
Mm.
that's always kind of the way I see filmmaking or any martial arts or even any craft that you're trying to do, because you want to be open to something that's bigger than you, for sure.
Mm. That's really cool, man. Now, if you were to give any advice to your younger self, go back in time, not change the past. We're not creating any Loki variants here, but like go
Yeah.
back and give yourself some advice. What type of advice would you give yourself?
I'd give them all the World Series results and all the lotto numbers
God,
and
right.
kind of like figure out.
That's Back to the Future too, man.
Heck yeah,
It's a great
that's what it's
movie.
about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a great.
I got to put myself in a
Great
position
film.
for success and not have to spend 10 years, raising money to make a film. That's the way to do it.
Sports Almanac. Right. I
Um,
like that one, man.
yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. It's maybe enjoy the ride. It's one of those things where it's like, you get into
Mm.
this whole, you start to overthink. He's like, well, if I change the thing, like you say, would I be who I'm now? So I don't really have
Yeah,
regrets
yeah, yeah.
about, where things are. And this is a great place to be. I'm thankful. But I guess it was just kind of like, yeah, just stop and smell the roses, enjoy the ride for a little bit. 'Cause maybe in my younger age, I was a little bit more like gung ho and a little bit more kind of like driven. But in a lot of ways, you have to kind of
Mm.
be driven at a certain age. I think that, there's seasons in your life that you have to kind of like kick it
Right.
into high gear, and there's seasons in your life where you got to kind of like slow it down and ease it on down the road as well. So it's like there's just like kind of like all those kind of things. It's very zen. It's very zen. I look at a very big picture in that sense.
Yeah,
So
I like that. Yeah, I was I'm a big follower of that. Kind of just sometimes you got to go with the seasons. You got to go with the flow.
yeah, and it's okay.
But
And there's a and it's okay to be young and ambitious. And then I think that's all good too.
Right.
It's all part of your growth.
But that's also the exact theme of your movie,
Mhm.
kind of the paper tiger. I think the scene that I identified most with, because my wife here is a singer, and then when we had our daughter, I was, we had this kind of discussion, like who's going to be, kind of doing more of the parenting, who's going to be the one who's kind of kind of at the forefront, and because her career was much busier than mine, and the stuff I'm doing I can do at home, and so I've been really kind of glued at the hip to my kiddo since she was born. And one of the things that was funny when they're going through this fight scene and you get the villain, they find him and they're stuck in that alleyway and the kid starts calling. I was just like, yeah, man, I related to that scene. So I think that you nailed it, man. But one last question for you as we finish up. Like, as you look at your career, what do you want to be remembered for? Like, what do you want to be like your calling card in the industry?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's kind of like once it's out into the world, like I said, it's basically the movies are for everybody now. So I think maybe that answer is a little bit different for everybody. For me, it's like it's less about like what I want to be remembered, but also just kind of be in that state of process. Always look for the next one and always create and look to kind of like even be better and keep growing. And so I think that's kind of like that growth mindset that I definitely want to keep at. So I don't know how I'll be remembered. I'm not dead yet, so we'll see. So.
Right. It didn't mean like that. Anyway, it's like more like what's your legacy? Like what's your vibe that you want to kind of put out there? What's that?
I think the legacy
story?
is at the end of the day is to get people interested in seeing what you do next. So hopefully you
I like
leave
that.
a body of work and you're a trail of tears or a trail of movies that are still like out there that people enjoy and want to see what you're doing next. And that's kind of like what gets me excited about filmmakers that I love. It's like because you love their work so much, you're just so excited to see what's next, and
Right.
I have to see I don't expect to see the same thing from a person. I just want to see what that person comes out of that person. So I think those are the things that I would want to kind of say leave that impression.
I like that. I like what you said there too, because like I like the idea of just want to see what there was that story of Tarantino was going to do a Star Trek.
Oh yeah.
And like, regardless of what you think about Tarantino, like when I heard that, I was like, damn, I want to see what a Tarantino Star Trek would look like. It's just like it's how do you mix these two different styles? And so it's just interesting.
Absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate, and I hopefully anyone who's tuning in can go and check out the Paper Tigers because it's awesome. Where can people watch it now? What is the best place to check it out?
Let's see. Well, we're out in the U.S. and Canada. We're out on Amazon and iTunes, and UK as well. So U.S., Canada, UK. We're out on Amazon and iTunes. We're on all the digital platforms. If you go to our website, we're on thepapertigersmovie.com. It'll have all the ways that you can click through and see. Hopefully we'll keep rolling out to the rest of the countries and internationally, and we can keep getting this movie out there as much as we can.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on tonight, and hopefully a lot of more people will keep seeing it, and hopefully Marvel will call you soon, man.
I gotta pay my phone bill now, so let's make sure I don't have any missed calls. We'll see what's going.
Well, I appreciate it, man.